Yeah, it was just got wrecked for no reason. Just dumb racing. Just dumb moves being thrown out there. Guys that don't know what they're doing, so they throw crazy ass blocks, and it's just ridiculous. We shouldn't be wrecking all these cars. I'm not Tony Stewart. I'm not as smart as he is. He can say it a lot better than I could, but this is just dumb. Yeah, I mean, you'd think these guys would be smarter than that. Look, we all cause wrecks. I get in wrecks all the time, and I cause them, but the same one over and over again. It's the same thing. Somebody throws a stupid block that's never going to work, wrecks half the field, and then goes,
Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 3 of Dirty Air, your number one NASCAR podcast, DFS and gambling. I'm your host, Ryan Baumel, as always, joined by Jason, DFS NASCAR on Twitter. Jason, say what's up.
What's up, guys?
And as always, Brandon Cruz, DFS on Twitter. Brandon, what's up?
Hey, nothing much. Hope everybody's doing well and looking forward to this week of racing.
So
Daytona, baby. Can't wait. So excited.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's finally, as a casual fan, as everything is, Daytona 500 is like, okay, the NASCAR season's here. It's the big event. It's the first event. Sunday, February 14th. It's 500 miles, 200 laps at the Daytona International Speedway. 3 stages, 65 laps, 70 laps. The qualifying is Wednesday night or the pole qualifying for the top 2 cars in that front row, and then the rest of the field is decided from the duels. So before we get into this one and get into everything that goes on to it, Jason, when you hear Daytona 500, what is the first thing you think of?
Wow, I think of excitement, man. I think of edge of your seat, just adrenaline pumping, TV action, all the time. A lot of times it starts off slow. These guys ride around a little bit, but as those laps tick off, the intensity picks up. And it's one of the few races of the year where you get goosebumps those last final 10 laps of the race. So it's definitely the highlight of the season. They call it the Great American Race for a reason.
And Brandon, what's your thought? You hear Daytona 500, what comes to your mind?
Dude, I'm so close to just running off all our listeners and making an Earnhardt reference, but just starting the season again. Just getting back in the swing of things after the 2 months off.
Side note, I was at that Earnhardt race at Daytona.
Even so, I can't.
I was there, dude. Like 16 years old, leaving the track.
Oh, man.
I mean, it was brutal. It was definitely brutal times.
Oh, man.
My dad and my brother, big Earnhardt fans, just crying. I was a Gordon fan. We stopped at DEI on the way home, on the way back drive home, because we drove down from Ohio to Florida, and we swung by DEI for the memorial.
You don't want me commenting. You just.
Oh no!
Let's move on.
I'll say it is.
Let's go.
It is one of those things that, like, as brutal as it is part of the history of Daytona, and it is kind of hard to not at least mention it when you talk about Daytona. And obviously, looking at it somewhat in a positive, all the safety changes and everything that's being made since then. Obviously, hopefully, trying to learn. But I think this slate is going to be kind of interesting, and it's obviously we don't really have any salaries or anything, any qualifying positions or anything to really go off of. But I'll just kind of ask you guys a couple questions. We'll go through a couple things on how you attack both a super speedway from a DFS GPP point of view and a cash point of view, and kind of just go through that. So Jason, I'll start with you. So cash lineup for a super speedway. How do you attack that?
I mean, cash lineup for super speedways are basically very simple. You want to just start guys starting 30th on back, really. These races are known for the big wreck. I don't think we've really talked about how these races typically play out. But if you're a casual NASCAR fan, like I said, the intensity level rises in these races as it goes on. One person makes a mistake, the blocks become more aggressive, the bumps become more aggressive. Somebody ends up slipping and taking out a huge chunk of the field. So a lot of times on these cash games, it's just about minimizing that risk of getting those big negative swings. All the major points come from the back anyway, and if you can at least get a couple of those guys through when that big wreck happens and all the people you're playing against are getting those negative points, pretty simple, not easy, but if it goes right, it's a pretty clear path to cashing pretty easily in those cash games. I would say that's
And
probably
so,
one of the biggest edges in DFS in general is playing cash games on super speedways and just playing the last 6 guys in the field.
and so, Brandon, how do you use that knowledge and that strategy and compare it to how you attack a GPP slate at a super speedway?
Well, you know, it's not that different. There's so much volatility involved in the plate tracks. Is you can really take any strategy. Obviously, I mean, everybody knows some sort or fashion of play guys in the back. It just depends on how you do it, and we still say that, and yet not everybody does. And I don't just mean play the good guys in the back. I mean
Right.
literally play positions. Um,
And you're right. A lot of
play.
people don't click that, even in
Yeah,
like cash games. They aren't
I
clicking
mean,
some of those guys.
I've been beating people over the head with a baseball bat for years saying that, and I guess I've hit them too hard because they're not listening anymore.
So
But
scared to leave like $8,000 on the table.
and yeah, or they don't believe in like a Cody Ware or a JJ Yaley or a BJ McLeod. Whereas this year, especially this year, and we'll talk about it more, but people are just afraid to play the back markers, and obviously you need certain circumstances for that to work. If this race goes green, playing guys from the back is not optimal in that situation. However, the way I approach it for GPPs, I don't play cash, but for GPP specifically, I understand that the optimal lineup is going to include a driver probably starting between first and 15th, and then most likely the rest would be from 15th on back or from 10th to 20th. I mean, it varies on the races, but I just embrace chaos at the plate tracks, especially with how they're racing now. If there's one wreck or if there's an instant where it takes out a lot of drivers, which we've seen, and typically it's at the end of the races. But if there's a wreck that takes out a big portion of drivers, I'm cashing in GPPs regardless. And if I end up landing on an optimal lineup out of pure luck, in the moment, it happens. If not, I'm at least playing it safe enough to where, I cash in GPPs on plate tracks. I really don't. It's odd that, say at like 1.5 miles or anything else, I'm aiming for the optimal lineup. Whereas Daytona, I'm just aiming for a lineup that scores well. If it ends up becoming optimal, that's what it happens. But I cannot go into any plate track expecting my 6 guys to be optimal. Like, we need races to go so many different directions.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I mean, like you're saying, these races have just so much variance. Like, there's no edge in picking the guy. Like you said, it's about optimizing that PD upside and just embracing the chaos. I mean, there's no way to predict. Like, I mean, anybody can finish in the top 10 at Daytona. Anybody, pick a driver, they can finish in the top 10. So even a lot of times, if that big wreck doesn't happen, runs happen, guys get pushed, find himself in the right spot, right time. I mean, we've seen it time and time again.
And I think also from my point of view, from a casual fan point of view, is the one thing that kind of don't realize until you actually watch and see what's going on is how much bigger a super speedway is than, a normal intermediate oval or anything like that. And I think the thing with that is you've got guys that are going to be a lot less laps down from the back. So when the wreck happens, you've basically giving yourself more of a leverage towards the end of the race. At an intermediate track, if your guy's 25 laps down, something like that, and there's a wreck with 5 laps to go, that doesn't do anything for you. But these kind of, your 3, 4, 5 laps down, if you're even that, I think that's the other thing is that, of how big it is and how hard it is to go many, many laps down without any kind of engine or, I guess, car trouble. And that kind of leads into my next thing for Brandon. How does a super speedway car differ from, let's say, just a normal kind of intermediate oval racetrack car?
Well, it's mainly trimmed out. Obviously, you're not putting the brakes that you normally run. You're putting in a lot longer gear, and you're basically making that thing as aerodynamic as possible. And to get as much of that spoiler in the little wicker bill on the edge of the spoiler, you need to get that out of the air as much as you can. So you're going to see the cars yee-yawed all over the place. Some are leaning more to the right than other cars, trying to get the spoiler out, and you'll really see it down the straightaways. And as I said, I think in our first episode you'll see certain teams messing around with the roof flaps, trying to get those up. I mean, trying to get them up by, just a slight angle to try and take air off those, off that spoiler. But it's basically just trimming your car out, having it as low to the ground as possible.
And so, Jason, do you use when you're looking at a super speedway, slate. Is there? So you talked about how people say they use guys from the back. People say they do all of that, but in reality, it's not always done that way. Do you leave yourself a certain amount of salary on here because you know people try and spend salary? Is this a slate you don't worry about salary? How do you look at salary on a slate like this?
I honestly never pay attention to my salary on super speedways. I mean, with the guys that you're playing, you're always going to have salary. The biggest thing that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to focus on those guys who are starting towards the back, who are getting overlooked. You know, like obviously if Chase Elliott starts 28th, he's going to be well owned. We already talked it's a high variance race. So you're probably going to fade Chase Elliott there because odds are he's probably going to wreck because odds are everybody's going to wreck. So I think it's about finding those spots and finding the guys who are getting overlooked in those ranges and avoiding the guys who you know everybody's going to be on.
And so, Brandon, when we're looking at a super speedway slate, especially this one, in terms of your bankroll, how big of a slate are you playing? Is it more towards cash, GPP? How do you normally play these kind of slates?
Oh, that's interesting. We'll have to see when we get to Sunday how much I move. I have 300 set aside for the 500 right now. I'm sure that'll grow by the time we end up getting through the week. But I mean, I probably play, let's say, let me try and think. For the whole year of DFS, I would probably say 25% of my bankroll is on the super speedways, if not more. Because I mean, I hammer these things. If you go on my channel, my longest videos and my longest discussions are about plate tracks and the lineups. I put out a video, I think around the 20th or 19th of January, titled "How I Make Daytona 500 Lineups" for people who aren't familiar with how I do it. And it's not so much of I'm picking good plays or bad plays. I'm just trying to hit literally every position, like I said. I play positions. I don't really play drivers. If I can get lower ownership on people, I'm going to do it. Like I said, obviously that needs Rex, but specifically looking at the 500, we almost always have the leaders wrecking for the lead at some point within the last 20 laps. Now, whether that's on the white flag, whether that's 3 to go, 8 to go, 20 to go, 45 to go, obviously that'll vary on the race. But normally, guys starting up front are going to wreck at some point. Not all of them are going to wreck, but everybody has an equal chance of wrecking here. In terms of the cars who are slow or the quote-unquote back markers, the only thing you got to worry about is them not going enough laps down to where they can't make up for the people who wreck. Like, say, Talladega, the fall Talladega race this last year. Corey LaJoie, he went 8 laps down because he had a fuel pump issue. He came back out on the track, and everybody wrecked at the end of that race. Or not everybody, but a good portion of the field wrecked. And because he was stuck 8 laps down, he ended up finishing 1 lap below all the people who wrecked. So he wasn't able to take advantage of those big wrecks. And LaJoie isn't even a back marker. If you look at someone like Cody Ware, who wrecked on the final lap in the 27 car, he still finished better than some of the guys who had wrecked before they went to that last green-white checkered. So you're playing almost 3 different games at these plate tracks. 1, you're trying to get guys who can finish ahead of where they start. 2, you're trying to avoid the guys who wreck. And 3, if you're playing guys in this back, you also have to fight the fact that they need to at least try and stay in the draft.
And so, yeah, and I think
Jason,
to add to that, though, with those guys from the back and that you are starting, these are underfunded teams and they do have equipment issues and stuff. So when you are setting your lineups, you definitely don't want to be overweight on any of these guys. Like, I found myself in a situation at a couple of times on super speedways where I had way too much of like a Quinn Hoff who wrecked in a tandem 2 draft like 3 laps in the 500 last year, and he hit it. I had maybe like 60% of them, So I don't think you want to put yourself in a situation where you're way too heavily exposed on those guys, but kind of split up your exposure to them.
And I'm gonna bounce an idea off you. Obviously, they can wreck and everything, and I'll talk about FanDuel for a second. Nobody plays. If you think nobody plays the back markers on DraftKings, nobody plays the back markers on FanDuel. At that Talladega race, I think I played Quinn Hoff, Cody Ware. I don't remember who the other 2 back markers were, but I think I had a combined ownership on the lineup of like 14%. And
points per laps over there, right? So outlast is significant over there.
Yeah, so I mean, nobody plays them there. And if you look at DraftKings, obviously they changed the scoring a bit. So this year it's a bit harder. It's still a plate track, but it's a bit harder to have a lineup survive in a normal week. Like, say, if someone crashes and finishes 40th, you're only getting 1 point, or you get negative points if they finished up front. But at least at this plate track, if you, for example, start the guy who's starting 40th, yeah, sure, he has 1 point. But there's going to be guys who start, 20th, 18th, 17th, where if they wreck, they're actually going to end up scoring less points than that 1 point the 40th car has. So that's another advantage that you have by playing guys in the back.
Very high floor. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Jason, how do you use the real life strategy in terms of your DFS strategy? So between how the ownerships and the manufacturers and those kind of strategies out there, how do you use that to play into your lineups?
Well, it's definitely could be beneficial to stack, manufacturers. Fords are typically really good at running well together, but they're always in the wreck together too, though. So, I mean, that's kind of the double-edged sword when you start playing these team, like playing all Hendrick guys, thinking they're going to draft together, or playing all Chevys. If they are drafting together and running well, when the wreck happens, they're probably taking out a significant amount of them. So I really don't look into that too much as far as setting my lineups. Like I said, like kind of Brandon said, this is really all about picking your starting positions. It doesn't matter really who the drivers are in those spots. I mean, it matters from a standpoint as ownership, because you don't want to be on the high-owned guy. But as far as, I don't really go too much into that.
Yeah, the only reason that's the main question anymore is because that one Talladega race where it went green the whole time and Stuart Haas just dominated the race. And it's happened. I mean, if you look at it, if you look at the races, obviously Chevys work together, Fords work together. Penske's going to stay together. Joe Gibbs is going to work together. But even not this last race, but the 2019 500 when Denny won, I think Kyle, maybe it wasn't Kyle. I know two of the Joe Gibbs drivers wrecked there, and then it was Denny and then another Joe Gibbs driver finishing third or fourth. And so even when you play teams, you're not guaranteed that all four or three of the drivers or two of the drivers or all eight of the Chevys or however many of the Fords or how many of the Toyotas, there's no guarantee they're going to, finish the race together either.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what metric you throw out. You're not going to be able to predict how this race is going to go. And it's just the bottom line is you play those starting positions that are going to give you the highest ceiling and the lowest floors.
And so, I mean, we've
kind
of
thing I'm sorry. I know
Go
Brandon, I had saw him touch on last year in a video, which I thought interesting, how he does we're talking about a stacking method, and kind of referred to it more like kind of familiar with like stacking football, as far as like he would do, like, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like a 3-2-1 stack where it'd be 3 from 30th on back, 2 from 20th on back, 20th to 30th, and 1 from like 10 to 20. Is that something you're still
yeah,
doing?
and I mean, obviously I didn't create that, and I'm pretty sure everybody does that, whether they realize it or not. But that's just what I call it to easily, tell everybody. So when you go into the plate race, I want to try and have a good portion of my drivers in my lineup starting from the back half of the field. Now, back half of the field, by definition, would be 21st on back. Sometimes in certain lineups or certain constructions, I don't want to define midway through the field as 21st. And so sometimes I'll move that up to 18th, 17th. Sometimes I'll move it back to 26th, 27th. But when I refer to like a 4-2 lineup, that's 4 drivers, from the back half of the field, 2 drivers from the front half and then whatever your, midway point of the field is, that's how many drivers you would take from that point forward or that point from behind. And that's, I mean, I just use that as a simple way to get across to people what I do when I make lineups.
Yeah, and I thought it was a very good, well thought out approach to it. So I wanted you to share that. Thanks. Good job.
We've kind of hammered out the place differential and all of that, but it is something to talk about. There are certain drivers that do tend to have some decent finishes. Super speedways, just kind of, I guess, by the driving style or just for whatever different reason. Brandon, what are some of the drivers that come to your mind when you think of a decent super speedway driver? I know as a casual fan, whether it's right or wrong, guys like Corey LaJoie, like you said, a guy like Ricky Stenhouse, and a guy like Denny Hamlin always seems to be up front.
Yeah, you got Denny Hamlin, you got Eric Almirola, you have recently you have Chris Buescher, Eric Jones, you have Ryan Newman somehow, some way, John Nemechek, Stenhouse Jr., Ty Dillon. I mean, those are looking at Dega. If you look at Daytona, obviously Denny Hamlin again. Daytona is way more crazy. Like nobody's ever really consistent. You have some guys who either wreck or finish top 10, like Brad Keselowski. He's had some bad luck recently at Daytona, typically finishing inside the top 10 or wrecking. You could look at Eric Almirola again, Matt DiBenedetto, Ryan Blaney, Chris Buescher, who is this? Ryan Newman again, and then people like Michael McDowell, people like Bubba Wallace. And as I say all these names, I mean, it's really just circumstances. Yeah, obviously some guys have the talent for this, others don't. Some guys have the car. Corey LaJoie, last year, it was the car he was running. I don't think it was LaJoie himself. It was just the chassis that he was running. But look, I mean, Fox Sports and everybody else, they're going to press the story of Hamlin being dominant at these plate tracks. But look, he just hasn't gotten a wreck. And I know you're going to have Boyer and Gordon and Mike be like, well, if you're not getting involved in a wreck, you got to be doing something right. But I think that's more so he just has a golden horseshoe shoved it so far up his ass he's not getting involved in wrecks. And so, sure, you want to see guys finish races, but if you see someone like, I mean, I said Ryan Blaney, but if you look at the past 5 Daytona races going from 2018 fall race to last year's fall race, 40th, 31st, 36th, and then 2nd and 6th, I mean, what story is that to really tell? Oh, if he gets in a wreck, he's going to finish last. If he doesn't get in a wreck, he's going to finish well. I mean, that's everybody. So I don't really focus on their finishing positions, and I don't really even focus on laps completed, really.
So Eric Jones and his new equipment, is that you think that's still good enough, especially to super speedway, to keep him in the draft and keep him in this? He's in play for you. Well,
if you look at RPM and how they ran with Wallace these last years, he only had 2. He had 3 poor finishes, and that was the spring race at Daytona in 2019, the spring race at Talladega in 2019, and the fall race at Dega in 2019. Other than that, his finishes at the 2 plate tracks are 14th, 19th, 16th, 5th, 15th, 15th, 14th, 2nd, and 15th. Was that RPM's car? Was that Bubba? I mean, I assume it was Bubba trying to, ride in the back and not get involved in wrecks. If you look at Eric Jones, I mean, he's either finishing top 10 or he's finishing outside the top 20. And as I just said, I mean, it's really, if they can survive carnage. I would imagine we're not going to see any real differences between how Bubba has finished in his old equipment compared to what he's in now, and how Eric Jones finished in his old equipment compared to what he's doing now. The only thing that you can kind of talk about Jones is he doesn't have, maybe that direct horsepower that the Toyotas had, but it's going to be so slim. I mean, he's going to stay in the pack. The way that these cars race nowadays, the way they push and the way the air goes around them, it just keeps them all together. Even if they're in a single file line, if they're in a pack, I mean, I don't see Eric Jones losing any of the draft or anything like that. Even the lower end cars this year, since we're getting guys actually racing in, the guys who race in from the duel should actually have pretty good cars or decent equipment to stay in the draft. So I don't really see anybody other than like Derek Cope or maybe a Rick Ware car or maybe Timmy Hill in the MBM entry losing the draft. And even at that, I don't think they're going to really worry about it either.
So Jason, for the 2021 Daytona 500, what are you most looking forward to?
I am most looking forward to sitting down on the couch, shutting all my social media, and just sitting back and watching the show unfold, man, and seeing who wins that race. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I think we're going to see a first-time winner, Daytona 500.
Brandon, what are you most looking forward to for the 2021 Daytona 500?
Man, I can't wait to see a replay of Ryan Newman's wreck 800 times before the race. That's what I'm looking forward to the most, man.
So, anything we missed before we get into the final, our version of the one and done we're going to do this year? Is there anything we missed?
I don't think so. I guess just with what we talked about Denny Hamlin a little bit and how he talked about the media's going to be pushing him. Yeah, they're going to be talking about how great he is, and it's going to definitely drive his ownership. And we just talked about the variance, and I don't see a situation where I'll be playing Denny Hamlin at all this week.
Brandon, anything else?
And I want to talk about projections real quick. Not necessarily number projections, but Jason, I'm not sure how you do yours, but as I just said, I play positions, I play guys from the back, but I still make projections and I make lineups to try and get the optimal projection of what I do. um, I don't just give everybody starting, 30th to 40th, 10 place differential points or anything. I don't want I don't want the misconception out there, everybody thinking, oh, he's just, assuming everybody starting in the back, passes 10 cars or whatever. I still project for their place differential individually. I project how many fast laps they get. I project if they're going to lead any laps and things of that nature. Do you do any of that stuff, Jason, or do you just kind of flat out play, whoever?
Yeah, typically in super speedways, when I make my projections, I will go through and look at kind of, like I would normally gauge like my projection based on where I think they could run without the big wreck, right? And that's kind of how I put that to where I can still see a guy starting 28th who I think is still finish like top 15 without the big wreck, and that's kind of my base for my projections and how I escalate it out. I definitely don't go in and say, well, 20 cars are going to wreck in front of this guy, so let's give him 20 more points. But yeah, definitely go back and look at the data. But actually this year, I think I'm getting away from doing the whole projections with my content. I don't know, because I feel like I put those projections out there, and I think people get kind of married to that. I get married to them myself too when I find myself making my lineups. And yeah, the projections are good, but I feel like it makes me kind of miss opportunity to where I should be going for leverage plays when I'm playing all my guys who I have projected high, and I can see like I'm getting more overweight on certain guys. So I think projections are that people seeing that number, it kind of makes people solidified on that call. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've noticed the same thing. I mean, for years people have asked me for my projections, and I was like, no, I'm not going to give them out. I'm not going to do that. Well, I'm doing it this year, so you can find them at Brian Cruz DFS on Patreon. But same thing. I mean, even if I have someone projected as a bad play, maybe not necessarily at an intermediate or 1.5, but certainly at a plate track, like I'm probably going to like Derek Cope, for example. I'm projecting him right now to wreck. I don't see him not wrecking in that race. So I might project him for, like -3 points or whatever. I'm still going to play Derek Cope. I'm going to play people who show up as bad plays or people that I just don't have any projection that are worth anything for. And even with that, like I'll still project, I would imagine Hamlin is going to lead a good portion of the race because he just wants to run out there. He likes running up in the front. That's typically how he avoids those wrecks, even though the wrecks usually happen in the front towards the end of the race. That's why I was saying I think he's more lucky than anything. But I let me look real quick. I
mean, just I guess for as a content provider, and you're putting these projections out, and it's like, okay, well, you have Kevin Harvick projected as for 65 points this week, so why are you telling me that Denny Hamlin, who you have projected for 52 points, is the better play? And it's like, well, you have to factor in the ownership and that Kevin Harvick's gonna be 50% owned, and there's a likelihood, the chance that he doesn't dominate. So that's what kind of makes it hard from that aspect, and I struggle grasping with that. So I might just get rid of projections altogether.
Yeah, and obviously as someone like you make projections, I make projections. A lot of the people who provide projections can really see through kind of BS projections or people who don't know what they're doing when they project. Because I've obviously I listen to a lot of stuff and I read tons of stuff. Like I scour the globe for really random NASCAR things to see what people are saying, and I can understand what good projections are, and I can certainly understand what bad projections are. So, I mean, just because somebody has projections, or if you have a gut feeling about someone and you don't see them being talked highly in projections or videos or by touts or anything, like don't feel like you can't play it. I mean, that's kind of obvious, but that's kind of how I know that's something people deal with a lot in the NFL or NBA or even NASCAR and things of that nature.
Yeah, I really like the approach that like you took, that you shared with me, where you were showing the what the route to hit value, right? To where you're showing what that driver has to do to hit the value, and I think that's a lot more beneficial than a projection, because then you can gauge for yourself, like, well, do I think this guy can hit that mark based on these stats you're showing me and what I know?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, a projection, sure. I mean, everything's a prediction, but what I did last year at DFS Tavern, where I was like, oh, this is what this driver needs exactly to hit 5x value, that it makes the DFS plays almost more like an over/under of like a sports bet, or like how many receptions this guy going to have in the NFL. If you put it in that scenario, it makes it easier to see the good plays and the bad plays, to see what you're getting your money's worth and what you're not getting your money's worth. And I don't think enough people really do that, or they don't do it as much as they should.
Right.
All right, so let's get into segment. We're going to do it for every race this year. Basically, our version of a one and done, except we're going to do 2 drivers. So the way this works is you're going to pick 1 driver a week. It'll be the total driver points accumulated for that driver in the race, real life points, not DFS points. And for the sake of the show, everyone's going to pick a different driver, so nobody will have the same driver in the same week. And you can pick the driver twice. So, Jason, I will let you
only
go
pick
first.
the driver twice all year.
Correct. And there's, I think, 37 races, so give or take, if you use 2 drivers, it's 18.
16 drivers or so.
Yeah.
All right. For the Daytona 500.
I've got mine if you want me to go first.
Yeah, you go first. Go first. I'm still thinking.
All right. My driver is going to be William Byron. I'm going to go with William Byron for the Daytona 500.
Brandon, are you ready?
I'll let you go first, because you're not gonna have my guy, so I'm not worried about it.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go Bubba Wallace.
Okay, I'm gonna go with my favorite play for the 500 on DraftKings, FanDuel, whatever it is. I'm going BJ McLeod. I think he does. I think BJ McLeod does extremely well this year.
I like it.
BJ McLeod for Brandon.
And he's locked in. He's locked into the race.
Okay. So he's starting top 36 in at least, right?
Yeah.
What ride is he in?
He's in his own team, Live Fast Motorsports 78 car. Got a sponsor. He's now, BJ has wrecked in the past. He's been in some bad situations, but I think BJ McLeod, if he's not in a wreck early in the race, he'll be smart enough to survive.
He's done really well recently, keeping cars clean as far as in the other series. So,
yeah, I love BJ McLeod.
So you thinking like he's gonna run up there, right? Like he can run top 20 without the wreck. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I really do.
I like this call. No one's gonna play him.
Yeah, no one's gonna play him. I mean, he's my favorite play going in. I don't care where he starts. I don't care what he does. I'm gonna be over the field on BJ McLeod. I already know it.
He starts like 15th. What if your race is good?
He's not finishing
there.
What
if your race is good in the duels?
He's not going to race good in the duels. He has no incentive to race good in the duels. I'm looking forward to it.
So Brandon, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but before we get out of here, let everybody know where they can follow you on Twitter, your Patreon, your YouTube, everything that you've got going on.
Yeah, Patreon, Brandon Cruz DFS on Twitter and YouTube. When is this being released? You said Monday?
Monday, yeah.
Monday. All right. Well, perfect. My Daytona schedule. Monday night, I'm sending out my Clash video on YouTube. Tuesday, I have a live show with Race for the Prize. Tuesday evening, Wednesday night, my duels video is going to come out on YouTube. Thursday, I have another live show with Race for the Prize for the duels. Friday morning, truck video is going to come out. Then I will most likely have another live show with Race for the Prize for the truck series. Then I have an Xfinity series video coming out Friday, a 500 video coming out Friday. Saturday, another live show before the Xfinity race, and then Sunday 10 a.m. on my YouTube, once again, the Daytona 500 show with Race for the Prize. So busy week.
Jason, your turn. Where can they find you?
Find me at freenascardfs.com. That's where all my content's at. I don't have a schedule broke down like that, but I'll definitely be having something released Monday night for the shootout. I'll be covering the duels. It'll be probably posted Wednesday night, maybe. I don't know, but it'll be up. Everything will be up at least a day before each slate. So check it out, freenascardfs.com. Follow me on Twitter at DFSNASCAR.
All right. Well, thank everybody for listening once again. This is been Dirty Air. We will be back for the Daytona Road Course event. That's February 21st, so the Sunday after the Daytona 500. And then after that, we finally get to some intermediates, some short track ovals. We get to some courses that can involve a little more strategy and a little more different ways to attack DFS and gambling. So we can obviously have more analysis then. But as always, on behalf of Jason, DFS NASCAR on Twitter, and Brandon Cruz DFS on Twitter, I'm Ryan Baumel, Gambling DFS Tips on Twitter. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.